Hello, everyone. This is Paul Christensen, and I am reviewing the Sung Standard, Chinese Ceramics and British Studio Pottery in the 20th Century, an article by Dr. Stacey Pierson, published in Colloquies on Art and Archaeology in Asia, number 22, in 2004. Dr. Pierson obtained her master's degree from the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, and a PhD from the University of Sussex. She is currently a reader in History of Chinese Ceramics at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, and is also the editor of the Transactions of the Oriental Ceramics Society, London. She specializes in the art history, archaeology, and technology of Chinese ceramics. She is the author of numerous articles and book chapters, as well as 9 books. Her most recent book, published in 2017, is Private Collecting, Exhibitions, and the Shaping of Art History in London, the Burlington Fine Arts Club. Her most recent article is True or False, Defining the Fake in Chinese Porcelain, published in Le Cahiers de France in 2019. Dr. Pierson states, as her thesis, that certain Song ceramics came to embody a somewhat austere and Orientalist aesthetic that inspired many British potters in the early 20th century. This influence was expressed both intellectually and technically in British studio pottery shapes, decoration, and glazes, but was not uniform or universal. Individual potters interpreted Song ceramics differently, but Far Eastern shapes, glazes, and designs became a part of the working vocabulary for British potters throughout the last century. The example seen on the left is a late 20th century stoneware bowl by the British studio potter Dame Lucy Rye, with clear Song inspiration. Pierson's methodology includes historical document references, such as the illustrated catalog from the important exhibition of early Chinese ceramics held at the Burlington Fine Arts Club in London in 1910. She also quotes from Barnard Leach's A Potter's Book, his influential ceramic manifesto, which became a Bible for potters and collectors in Britain after its publication in 1940. Pierson uses Leach's autobiography, published in 1978, in addition to scholarly references such as Oliver Watson's 1993 book, Studio Pottery, 20th Century British Ceramics in the Victoria and Albert Museum collection, to place British potters in their historical context. She utilizes her considerable knowledge and expertise with Chinese ceramics in the formal analyses of representative pottery examples. Some terms used in this article: Sung, now correctly spelled S-O-N-G, refers to the Song dynasty that controlled China from 960 to 1297, Common Era. Ming refers to a later Chinese dynasty that lasted from 1368 to 1644 in the Common Era. Zhu ware, an example of which is seen on the far left, is also spelled R-U ware, a rare type of pottery produced for the Song imperial court for a brief time around 1100 CE. It has a distinctive pale blue to Celadon green glaze over a light gray clay body that was fired at a relatively low temperature and is usually undecorated. Shizu ware, seen in the center, was produced in China from the late Tang dynasty into the early Ming dynasty in China. It is a high-fired stoneware with a transparent glaze over black painted decoration on a white slip. They are generally sturdy, maybe either thrown on a wheel or molded, and some can be quite large. Fahua refers to a type of Chinese stoneware or porcelain made as early as the 14th century, with bold, colorful decorations outlined in a raised white slip that resembles cloisonné metalwork. An example is seen on the far right. Minge is a concept of folk or popular art developed by Japanese philosopher Yana Suetsu with a like-minded group of craftsmen and potters in mid-1920s Japan. Pierson introduces her article with the statement that Song ceramics achieved preeminence in the minds of Ming Dynasty connoisseurs. These Ming collectors promoted an idealized definition of Song ceramics and assigned certain qualities and aesthetic values to them. These values and aesthetic qualities were later accepted by Chinese and Western collectors into modern times. In the Ming canon, only certain types of Song ceramics, like this roux bowl in the collection of the British Museum, seen on the left, were considered superior, and many other types of ceramics produced during the Song period, like shizu ware, seen in the previous slide, were left out. The author states that at the beginning of the 20th century, early Chinese ceramics, including those produced during the Song dynasty, became an inspiration for pioneers in the developing studio pottery movement in Britain. Pierson discusses the work of these potters while placing their contributions in temporal context. Reginald Wells was among the earliest to imitate Chinese stoneware glazes, and he noted in a letter to the Victoria and Albert Museum that it was their exhibit of Chinese ceramics that inspired him in his work. In 1919, Wells began a series of wares, including modeled blue glazed bowls, low-fired ceramics with flambe-style glazes, crackle glazed jars, and plain glazed jars, like the one seen on the far left. He stamped these pieces with the mark Soon, spelled S-O-O-N, which may be an allusion to Sung. William State Murray was influenced by the first public exhibition of early Chinese ceramics in England, the 1910 exhibition at the Burlington Fine Arts Club in London. Included in the display were a selection of Song wares, including Junware that were undecorated or decorated using direct physical methods such as carving, stamping, molding, or incising. In this way, Song ceramics became associated with a beautiful simplicity combined with fine craftsmanship. Murray later became a Buddhist and established a pottery in 1919. He produced a wide range of Song-type glazes, such as hare's fur glaze on jar forms and a Jun-type glaze on jars and bowls, as seen in the center. Charles Vyse was inspired by a broad range of early Chinese ceramics, not Song alone. He began studying Song glazes systematically in the 1920s and is credited with rediscovering the secret that Jun glazes are iron-based. An example of his work is the cup on the far right. Bernard Leach, seen throwing a pot in the photograph on the left, inspired the studio pottery movement with values and aesthetic qualities he found in Song ceramics. He became one of the best-known potters in the 20th century and published his ideas in A Potter's Book that became a Bible for potters and collectors. In the first chapter, Leach writes, "Of all pottery, that of the Song period is the most expressive of its material. It is, in fact, the purest of pottery." This view became common among studio potters in Britain in the first half of the 20th century, who were disenchanted with the proliferation of uniform industrial ceramics. They, with Leach, looked back to the earlier arts and crafts ideals of William Morris and saw embodied in Song ceramics those same principles of skilled individual craftsmanship. Leach succeeded in creating a new Oriental style of ceramics, an example of which is seen on the right, that continues to influence potters all over the West. Leach's ideals and aesthetic shaped those he taught. Catherine Pladel Bovary and Nora Braden were two of his students. Both continued to produce Song-inspired ceramics, as seen here on the right and left, after establishing potteries of their own. Bernard Leach's son, David Leach, is perhaps the last of the original generation of studio potters influenced by Song ceramics. One of his beautiful Celadon glazed tea bowls is seen on the right. For most British studio potters, the influence of Song ceramics was strongest before the Second World War. After the war, there was an influx into Britain of European potters, bringing with them different influences and interests. Prominent among them was Lucy Rye. Her sophisticated style echoed the polished modernism of the Austrian Wiener Werkstätte. However, a number of her forms are obviously Chinese-inspired. Her globular vases with wide flaring rims and her delicate, sharply conical bowls, an example of which is seen on the left, are close to the imperial Song dynasty aesthetics championed by Ming connoisseurs. But some of these use Chinese decorative techniques characteristic of the less valued Shizu wares. Rye exemplifies that there was not a single Sung ideal among potters or collectors in 20th century Britain. In this article, Dr. Pierson presents an engaging and informative discussion concerning the influence exerted by Song dynasty ceramics on the British studio pottery movement during the 20th century. I feel her article is well written, well researched, and easy to understand. The internal transitions are smooth, and the illustrations are of good quality. The article is written primarily for the educated layperson, but there is a wealth of historical context and insights for scholars as well. If I have any criticism, it would be the lack of documentation for her initial statements concerning the preeminence of Song ceramics being widely acknowledged in China as well as the West. The most pertinent references cited in this article include the illustrated catalog of early Chinese pottery and porcelain by the Burlington Fine Arts Club, London, 1910, Basil Gray's The Development of Taste in Chinese Art in the West, 1872 to 1972, included in the Transactions of the Oriental Ceramic Society, volume 39, Bernard Leach's two books, A Potter's Book, published in 1940, and his autobiographical Beyond East and West, Memoirs, Portraits, and Essays, published in 1978. Paul Rice and Christopher Gowing, British Studio Ceramics in the 20th Century, was published in book form in 1989, and Oliver Watson's book, Studio Pottery, 20th Century British Ceramics in the Victoria and Albert Museum collection in 1993. Thank you very much.